A few weeks ago, I reviewed Still, a Michael J. Fox movie on Apple TV+, which has since been Emmy nominated, by the way. But it got me thinking, it's been a while since I've reviewed any documentaries. In fact, in 2022, I don't even think I watched any docs, which is unlike me. And so I thought, you know what, let's take some of the most talked about documentaries of 2023 in the entertainment field. I love a documentary about a figure that we already know, and we dig a little bit deeper in there. And then when the Emmy nominations came out last week, turns out a few that were on my list were on the Emmys list as well. The fourth one we're going to talk about today, well, that one's a little too new. It just dropped on Netflix a couple weeks ago, so maybe we'll see that on next year's Emmy ballot. But let's talk about Wham, Pamela, A Love Story, Judy, Blume Forever, and Being Mary Tyler Moore. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my movie reviews for 4 of 2023's entertainment documentaries, 3 of which have been nominated for Emmys, like I said, in the Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Special category. And so Still, Michael J. Fox movie is up in that category, but also Being Mary Tyler Moore, Judy, Blume Forever, and Pamela, A Love Story, all up in that category. The 5th film in that category we're not going to talk about today, My Transparent Life, just because it's not really about a famous person in the entertainment industry, but it is about 2 trans people going through their transitions and sort of, what they're going through, what they're feeling. So it definitely sounds interesting, so I may hit that one eventually. But for this video, I wanted to focus on, the names and faces that we've been watching and listening to our entire lives. And so we're going to do that here in just a second. But first, let me welcome you into Dan Reviews It. Thank you for finding this video. We've got a ton of movie and TV reviews to check out. And speaking of the Emmy Awards, which I think will be in September at some point, in the next few weeks, I will be doing my Emmy predictions video with my buddy Tim, and also my other buddy Melissa is going to join us for that because she has watched some of the shows that Tim and I have not. So I think with the 3 of us, we'll have seen everything pretty much that has been Emmy nominated. So that will be a fun video. I'll drop that in a few weeks. But for now, let's focus on the 4 documentaries I want to talk about. We'll talk about the Wham one first because it's so recent, and then we'll just sort of do the other 3 in the order of release. But yeah, Wham you can check out right now on Netflix, and it is about the pop duo from England featuring George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley. And this is all about just those Wham years. It does not really cover, and one of my slight negatives about the movie is I maybe would have liked to see a 5-minute little sort of end cap of, okay, then George Michael went on to rule the charts. Andrew Ridgeley, I just know this from being a fan, went to auto racing and had mild success in that line of work. But they didn't really mention any of that, sort of stopped where Wham stopped. And, that's obviously the movie that they wanted to make. But this actually coincides with the 40th anniversary of their first full-length album, which is the 1983 record Fantastic. So we love that. And this was directed by Chris Smith, a name that I was sort of unfamiliar with just because it's so kind of generic. But I looked at his stuff, and he has done a lot of documentaries that I've really enjoyed, including the HBO series 100-Foot Wave. He directed the Fire movie for, I think that was the Netflix one. There were 2 Fire Festival movies, one on Netflix, one on Hulu. I think that was maybe the Netflix one. Also Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, which was about the making of the movie Man on the Moon, which was super interesting as well. And then he also was a producer on Tiger King. So look, this guy knows how to tell a story, right? And this takes us through the early days of Wham. And, definitely, look, I've been a fan for a long time, ever since I've pretty much, been into pop music in the mid 80s, and my mom was a huge Wham fan, so she got me into that. But and then George Michael's solo stuff, of course. But there were a lot of things I really didn't know about how Wham formed. I didn't know that George and Andrew were childhood buddies. They met as very young teenagers and took a liking to each other right away and started writing these songs. And I also didn't know that the band broke up because Andrew was kind of done with it. I thought there was maybe some kind of resentment there. George is being so successful on his own, whatever. And in that vein, the documentary actually is very sort of polite. There's a little bit here and there of scuffle and whatever, and George coming to terms with his sexuality, but even that was sort of like a non-issue. It's kind of a blip in their friendship. Obviously, George Michael did not come out to us as a public until the late 90s, and a big scandal, which, again, they don't really go into here at all. But, listen, maybe this is paving the way for a George Michael biopic. We've had so many lately in the music industry with Queen and Elton John and Whitney Houston. Maybe it is time for a George Michael biopic where we cover, certainly the Wham years, but then everything else as well. So this ends up sort of being just once they became famous, it sort of becomes, okay, here's where we were when we wrote this song, and here's what we were thinking with this. And George Michael has since passed away, which is very tragic. Although, and I didn't even plan this, but I'm wearing my Rock and Roll Hall of Fame t-shirt. He will be inducted into the Hall of Fame this year, which I think is awesome. Great singer. But in any event, it turns out to be one of those sort of like, here's where we wrote this charted here, on to the next single. And let's talk about that. But we have tons of archival footage of George Michael being interviewed. The Andrew Ridgeley stuff, I think, is probably all new. We never actually see him. It's all over voiceover, so I don't know, how old he looks or whatever, from what we're hearing. But it sounded to me like he was giving us sort of the current version of Andrew Ridgeley telling us the story of Wham in the past, and then of course the old footage of George Michael, because he is no longer with us. But one of the most interesting things about really all of these movies, all four of these, is the vast amount of footage we have from talk shows and interviews and things like that over the many, many years. And I think that is one thing that sort of sets an entertainment documentary, I should say, kind of aside from some of the other genres, because you have, these people's stories in their own words. Mary Tyler Moore has passed on as well, but through all these interviews over the years, we have her speaking in her own words as well. But something really interesting about the Wham one is the sort of scrapbooking that George Michael's mother did over the years. I mean, from the very, very beginning. And we use a lot of that footage in this movie to sort of, kind of piece together things and look at old newspaper clippings and all of that. So that was pretty interesting. Overall, this was a very, very well done documentary. Certainly nothing, necessarily wrong with it, but I would have liked maybe a little bit more about Wham. Wham's members after the fact. George Michael, I think we all kind of know, but maybe a little blip about him, and then tell us about Andrew Ridgeley and his race car career or whatever. But like I said, this dude that directed it, Chris Smith, certainly knows how to tell a story and piece it together. And the music, look, it's amazing. If you're a pop music fan from the 80s, it's going to be in your head for days, if not weeks, after the fact. It certainly has been with me. I watched it about a week and a half ago. So I will leave Wham on Netflix with a B+. All right, so like I said, we're going to go in order of release. And the next one actually is on Netflix as well. This one came out in January, though, called Pamela, A Love Story. And this is all about Pamela Anderson. And I sort of shied away from this because I don't know that I necessarily cared that much, until the Michael J. Fox documentary, when I was sort of digging through, okay, what entertainment biopics or documentaries have come out in 2023. I saw this one on the list. I thought, well, okay. I mean, I obviously know who Pam Anderson is, but I did just watch the Hulu series Pam and Tommy, so I sort of got a little sense of that. But then it got this Emmy nomination. I thought, okay, well, now this is something maybe that's a little bit more exciting than I thought it was going to be. And so this one is directed by Ryan White, who, again, kind of unfamiliar with that name. He's done a few things that I've enjoyed, including a movie called Good Old Frida, which was a documentary about the Beatles, like secretary or receptionist, through, a lot of her letters and stuff like that. It was very interesting. And then he did a Dr. Ruth one called Ask Dr. Ruth a couple of years ago that I liked as well. So here's another guy who knows how to put together, a competent story. And again, here's somebody who we've seen on TV, for the last however many years, 35 maybe, or whatever. Baywatch was late 80s, early 90s, I guess. They don't mention Home Improvement, but that is where I think a lot of us first saw her as well. But it does cover the movie Pam and Tommy and her thoughts on it, which she's never watched it. She's never watched the sex tape that it was a part of. A lot of that stuff was sort of covered in Pam and Tommy, though, and as much as she didn't want to watch it, and it was bringing back a lot of triggering things for her, which I understand. It makes sense. It's understandable. But in watching Pam and Tommy, I actually thought it was very sympathetic towards Pamela Anderson, and not vicious, like I think maybe she was fearing. But in any event, that's sort of a minor part in this. But yeah, this tells us the story of, her growing up, and then her stints in Playboy, and then becoming famous on the TV show, and her many, many marriages. And, the theme of this documentary is sort of, in love with love. She still wants to keep trying. She still has hope that there is, somebody out there for her. She wants to keep giving love a try, even though she's been married so many times. But it does present some interesting questions about, what happens in your later years when you are known for being a huge sex symbol. Marilyn Monroe passed away, long before she got to the age Pam Anderson is now. And there's certainly been some work done on Pam's face. She doesn't really necessarily talk about that, but she does sort of joke, that you wouldn't want to see her boobs now, because they don't look great. They talked a little bit about her implants and stuff. But it's interesting because there's not that many people who have been, huge sex symbols that have gone into their, 60s and their older age. And what's the psyche of that, And so the doc ends with her going on to Broadway to do Chicago, which I didn't know anything about. And shows some clips, and she actually got some fairly, rave reviews for her performance. And so, it's sort of a nice little pin in this particular chapter of Pam Anderson's life. But since she is still alive with us, we see, a lot of current interview stuff with her mixed with her diary entries, which she chose not to read herself. She thought it might be too painful. So we do have somebody else doing the voiceover for her. But really, an eye-opening documentary that I wasn't quite expecting, Not that I thought she was just, some vapid blonde or whatever. I know there's more than meets the eye with most people. But, she is, I mean, like, I never watched Baywatch, it wasn't my thing. But she is a very, well-spoken person, and she reflects on her life very well here. And again, stuff like this is always going to be a little bit, biased because, okay, it's her in her own words. So how does she feel about things in her past, not how other people have felt about it. But she does talk pretty openly about, that she didn't like going on talk shows and having people just talk about her boobs, and that kind of thing, which makes sense. I don't think, I mean, I'm not much of a looker. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff, but, it makes sense that she would want to be taken a little more seriously. And that's why she did, try to branch out into movies in the 90s, which did not really work, and why she's doing Broadway now. But we talked to one of her, I guess maybe both of her sons, actually, from Tommy Lee, and they sort of give us their perspective on things. And this was, I don't know what I was expecting. I don't think I was expecting a completely, vapid experience, but I'll be honest, I was won over by Pam Anderson. I was floored about how interesting her whole life is, really. Her upbringing stuff I didn't really know much about. And since I didn't really follow along with Baywatch and all that, I knew about the sex tape and whatever, but not much else. And the marriages I knew about. So this was an interesting one. Another winner of a documentary. I leave Pamela, I should say, a love story, also with a B+. I could even go maybe A- on it, but we'll leave it with B+ for now. All right, so up next, let's talk about Judy Blume, Forever. And this is available now on Amazon. This is an Amazon Prime original. and this is as well in that Emmy-nominated category for the documentaries. And this is about Judy Blume. And the timing couldn't be better for this because the movie Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret came out this year to rave reviews, including from this critic. It was one of my very, very few A-pluses of the year so far. Absolutely loved it. And I never even read the book. I just, fell in love with the story and everything about it. I have read a few Judy Blume books, more like in the Fudge series and the Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing, which I think Fudge might be in that. But in any event, this covers not just Judy Blume then and how she got started and her books, obviously, but it also, because she is still with us as well, it covers her life now. She owns a bookstore, and we see a lot of current day interviews, not just with her, but she goes poring over some of her fan letters from back in the day. She used to get 1,000 to 2,000 letters a month from fans, and there were a few that she would correspond regularly with. And the producers have found these people in present day, and so they interviewed them as well. And they are kind of both reading the letters back and forth, as we watch the documentary. So that was very interesting. This was directed by Davina Pardo and Leah Wolchok, who I'm unfamiliar with. But it covers a lot of not just, her books and stuff, but more about her legacy. And it talks about some of the censorship issues, and how she is kind of the mother of young adult books and young adult fiction. And, there would be no sort of young adult specific section probably without somebody like her speaking so frankly about things like sex and masturbation and things that, nobody was really talking about in books back in the day, except for, like trashy romance novels type of thing. This is, writing from the child's perspective. And it certainly made me want to, go out and get a bunch of her books and read them. Much like the Wham documentary got me to, listen to a bunch of Wham songs for a few days. The Pamela Anderson documentary, I must admit, did not make me want to watch Baywatch or anything. But this one really, I think, was the most moving of all four of the documentaries. And I loved seeing her present day interviews, sort of looking back at some old interviews from the past. You have her on the Letterman show or on, like with Gene Shalit on the Today Show, talking about, some of her books and some of the controversy surrounding it. And even then, in the early 80s, before I can remember things, her speaking so frankly about sex and stuff. It's so refreshing, and I just love somebody kind of sticking to their guns and, this is the hill I'm going to die on. And what a hill, what a great hill, to fight censorship and to fight, people who want to suppress the real world, for teenagers and stuff. So I loved that. I didn't know she owned a bookstore now. That's really cool. This really, really got me in the feels, this documentary. And there's a few famous people that are spoken to in talking head pieces, including, Samantha Bee and Lena Dunham, people that, were heavily inspired by these Blume books. But talk about a legacy. She really changed the game. And so I love that they really kind of dove into that head first. But, it's not without its waves. She had a lot of criticism from people. And in fact, when she tried to write a couple of more adult novels that were mainly for adults and not for, kids and tweens and teenagers, she got a lot of flack for that too. And so they talk about that. They talk about, her marriage history and stuff, her two divorces. So this is probably of all four, it might be the most well-rounded of all the documentaries. I loved it. And much like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, certainly one of my favorite movies so far of the year. I leave Judy Blume forever with an A. All right, finally, we will talk about Being Mary Tyler Moore. This is on Max, and I actually just finished watching, for the first time, the Mary Tyler Moore show. I had maybe seen bits and pieces on like Nick at Night or something years ago, but I have the DVD box set, and so I went through the whole thing, and my God, is that not only does it still hold up, the comedy is hilarious, but what a game changer. It was a huge Emmy winner at the time. But I did watch the Dick Van Dyke Show a little bit when I was a kid, and I just went through that whole series maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and that's another classic. So this is all about of course, not only her shows and stuff, but her being a feminist icon, and much like Judy Blume, sort of changing the game a little bit for many, many people. And by a little bit, I mean entirely, And we see not talking heads here, but some voiceovers from people like Julia Louis-Dreyfus that, have always respected Mary Tyler Moore and what she did, not only for television, but for females and all of that. And breaking the mold, for sure. Like, she gets interviewed about the Dick Van Dyke Show and how at the time sitcoms were, except for, I Love Lucy, basically, but any family sitcom had, the mother vacuuming in pearls and stuff. And she was just like, I don't do that. And I don't know any, of my friends that do that. We want to portray a real woman. And I think that's what made Laura Petrie of the Dick Van Dyke Show so iconic. And then, of course, years later, she goes on to create an even more iconic role for herself as Mary Richards. So my biggest complaint actually with this one, this is unfortunately the worst of the four, not by much, but it focused a bit too much on her impact on entertainment and on female empowerment and that kind of thing, and not enough on her private life and her upbringing. Like she mentions briefly about her mom being a raging alcoholic and all of this. There wasn't enough balance for me. I personally, I would love to see an entire documentary on just the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I mean, they spend a good probably 20 to 25 minutes, back and forth on that show. And there's a voiceover from James L. Brooks as well, who was one of the creators. He helped create The Simpsons as well, but he's still with us. So we got to hear from him in the present day, talking about that show. And I would love to see the documentary about just the Mary Tyler Moore Show and how trend-setting and groundbreaking that was. And they talk about that one quote, and I forget who said it, but, as goes Mary Tyler Moore, goes the country. So she was really setting the trends, right from the start when that show came on. But I would have liked to see a little bit more of a balance with some of the stuff in her personal life. And they talk about, yes, her marriage, but her upbringing and, some of the things that made her and shaped her into the woman, that we saw on TV all those years. So I wish there was a little bit more of a balance there. And I've said all the other directors, so I should say this one as well. This was directed by James Adolphus, who I looked up, and he hasn't done really anything that I was too familiar with. He did direct part of the ABC miniseries Soul of a Nation. But other than that, this is the only documentary I had heard of that he had done. So yeah, maybe a little sharper focus there. But again, this is somebody we watched on TV all these years, so there were a ton of clips. Letterman again was brought up, but some other people as well that talked to her over the years. And they were certainly interesting interviews, especially in her later years. Because she has passed away as well. But there were some interviews in her later years looking back. And so we sort of got that, perspective of, okay, back 30 years ago, this is what I thought, this is what I felt, as well as the interviews, sort of from in the moment. But I will leave Being Mary Tyler Moore with a B. Like I said, worst of the four, but, not by much. I just would have liked more of a balance there. But give me that Mary Tyler Moore Show documentary too. I would love to see that at some point. So there we go. We will do some more documentaries throughout the year. I would like to see My Transparent Life, which is the other one nominated this year at the Emmys for Best Documentary or Nonfiction Special. But for now, you can check all of these out on the respective streamers that I mentioned. And I'll see everybody next time on Dan Reviews It. Thanks for watching. Bye.